Overnight into August 15, a Ukrainian cruise missile traveled 900 kilometers inside Russian territory and struck a single industrial complex in the city of Samara. That distance alone would be a story on most nights. What makes this one different is what actually sat inside the building it hit. Reportedly, that one facility is the only place in Russia that assembles the Soyuz, two family of rockets, the same launch vehicles that carry Russian military reconnaissance satellites into orbit, and the same launch vehicles building out Russia's answer to Starlink. Two completely different Russian strategic programs, one military and one civilian-facing, both depend on the exact same production line, in the exact same building, with no second facility anywhere in the country capable of replacing it. One missile did not just start a fire. It found the single narrowest point where two unrelated ambitions both run through the same door. Let's find out with Decision Military. Before going further into why one building can hold that much weight, it is worth subscribing to Decision Military and sharing this video, because understanding where a country's true bottlenecks sit reveals far more than counting the missiles that fly over it. Start with what is actually confirmed. In the early hours of August 15, Samara's regional governor confirmed that a missile had struck an unnamed industrial enterprise, and the city's mayor described localized damage to industrial infrastructure. Neither official named the facility. Independent open-source analysts, working from satellite imagery and footage circulating shortly after the strike, identified the target as the Progress Rocket and Space Center, and one analysis reportedly geolocated the impact to a specific structure known as Building 106A. That level of precision matters, because Building 106A is not a generic warehouse. According to the same analysis, it operates under high cleanroom standards and houses the onboard electrical systems, instruments, and circuit boards installed into every Soyuz, two launch vehicle, described by one assessment as the rocket's own nervous system, its control systems, cable networks, and instrumentation compartment. Building 106B, where final assembly of the same rockets takes place, sits immediately nearby. This is where the first causal layer becomes clear. Striking the specific building that installs a rocket's control and electrical systems is not the same as striking a storage yard or a loading dock. If the reporting is accurate, damage to that one structure does not simply delay a handful of rockets already in the pipeline. It disrupts the exact step every future Soyuz two vehicle has to pass through before it can fly at all, regardless of which program that particular rocket was ultimately destined to serve. Next, the second causal layer explains why that single building carries so much strategic weight in the first place. The Progress Rocket and Space Center is reportedly the only facility in Russia that serially assembles the Soyuz, two family, the launch vehicles used to place Russian government, military, and reconnaissance spacecraft into orbit, including satellites tied to Russia's Liana Signals Intelligence Network and its Persona and Razdan optical reconnaissance systems. Those same Soyuz 1B rockets are also the exclusive launch vehicle for Rassvet, the low Earth orbit broadband constellation Russia has been building as its own answer to Starlink. One assessment of the facility's role put the underlying vulnerability in the plainest possible terms. There is no backup for this production. A country can diversify its missile suppliers or its fuel sources. It cannot easily diversify a single, highly specialized assembly line that took decades to build and years to master. The reconnaissance side of that dependency is worth sitting with for a moment. Satellites launched on Soyuz. Two vehicles reportedly include Russia's Liana Signals Intelligence constellation, which is designed to detect and locate electronic emissions, such as radio and radar signals, and its Persona and Razdan optical reconnaissance satellites, which are built to photograph terrain and military activity from orbit. Systems like these do not fight directly, but they feed the picture that Russian commanders use to decide where to aim everything else, from artillery to long-range missiles. A production line that struggles to replace or expand that reconnaissance layer does not lose a war by itself. It loses a measure of the visibility that makes every other weapon in its arsenal more accurate. The bottleneck was already tight before this strike ever happened. according to reporting on Russia's own launch cadence. Deploying the full planned Rassvet constellation of roughly 288 satellites would require at least 18 Soyuz 2.1B launches, while the facility has typically supported only 6 to 8 such launches per year. At that pace, Russia was already years behind its own constellation timeline before a single missile arrived. Whatever damage this strike caused does not create the bottleneck. It widens one that was already there. This is where the adversarial response becomes its own piece of evidence. Russian officials confirmed a strike occurred and confirmed damage, but declined to name the facility, describing it only as an unnamed industrial enterprise with localized damage. That pattern of confirming just enough to be credible while withholding the specific target is a familiar one in how Russian regional officials have handled previous strikes deep inside the country throughout this war. It does not disprove what open-source analysts identified. If anything, the gap between a vague official statement and a detailed independent geolocation analysis is itself a signal about which account is more complete. Next, consider what made this particular strike possible in the first place. The missile involved has reportedly been identified as an FP-5 Flamingo, a long-range cruise missile developed and produced inside Ukraine rather than supplied by a foreign partner. That distinction carries real weight beyond this single strike. A missile built domestically is not subject to the same allocation limits, delivery timelines, or political negotiations that shape how many Western-supplied systems Ukraine receives in a given month. Reaching a target 900 kilometers from the border with a weapon Ukraine manufactures itself demonstrates a deep strike capability that grows independent of what any single ally chooses to provide, and that changes the calculus for every facility inside Russia that previously assumed distance alone was a form of protection. The systemic consequence extends beyond Samara alone. The same night, according to Ukrainian officials, long-range strikes also hit the Savasleyka airfield in Russia's Nizhny Novgorod region, with a direct hit recorded and a fire reported on the airfield grounds afterward. Two separate targets, struck in the same overnight window, points toward a coordinated operation rather than a single isolated raid, extending the same deep strike reach that reached the rocket facility to a military airfield hundreds of kilometers away in a different direction entirely. The strategic implication reaches in two directions at once, and both deserve honest treatment rather than overstatement. It would be premature to claim Rassvet has been destroyed or permanently disabled by a single strike. The full extent of the damage is still being assessed, and Russia retains the option of repairing or partially rerouting production over time. What the strike does demonstrate is that a single, irreplaceable node now sits under direct and repeatable threat at a range Ukraine has proven it can reach with weapons it builds itself. Every future Soyuz 2 launch, whether it carries a reconnaissance satellite meant to help target Ukrainian positions, or a broadband satellite meant to reduce Russia's reliance on outside networks, now depends on a facility that has already been reached once. 900 kilometers from the border. One building, reportedly holding a rocket's entire electrical nervous system. 18 launches needed, only 6 to 8 typically flown in a year, even before this strike. Two targets hit in the same overnight window, hundreds of kilometers apart. A missile built inside Ukraine, not supplied from outside it. Each of these details describes a different piece of the same story. A single point of failure, found and struck, with no second facility standing behind it. This channel studies these systems to understand how a war is actually decided at its industrial roots, not to turn a factory fire into spectacle. Local reporting indicates at least 2 people sought medical treatment after the strike, workers whose jobs happened to sit inside a building whose function reached far beyond their own city. That is the quieter part of a story mostly told in kilometers and satellite counts. So, if Russia's entire space launch program now runs through a single building that has already proven reachable, how much of Russia's future in orbit, military and civilian alike, is now resting on whether that one building can be rebuilt faster than it can be struck again? Consider subscribing to Decision Military for the next analysis, because the systems holding a war economy together are rarely the ones that make the loudest headlines.